I wanted to talk to you today, I've been asked to talk to you today about the writing process, about writing a novel. And I also want to talk to you about something that's very important to me. It's a subject of trust, and how that works for me as a writer and how it's worked for me in my life. As Mr. Van Dale mentioned, I am not from around these parts, I am an Australian, but I kind of reversed the immigration trend. My wife and I have moved from Australia to here. Not full-time, but we're very lucky enough to spend 6 months of every year here in South Africa, but travelling around Southern Africa into neighbouring countries, and the other 6 months of the year back in Australia. I'm only going to talk for about 10 to 15 minutes or so, and then would prefer it if you could ask me some questions. And I've got a little incentive. I've got 3 copies of my book, so we'll give away a free book to whoever asks the best 3 questions, which will be judged by my wife after this. So don't be shy when it comes to the questions. And you can ask me about anything. I do travel around a lot, and I do like spending a lot of time in the African bush. As a tourist coming here back in 1995, 20 years ago, for the first time, I think what hooked me and my wife on Southern Africa, South Africa in particular, was the bush, was the wildlife. Typical tourist sort of experience, we were kind of overwhelmed by it, and that's what started bringing us back as well. So I've spent about 20 years, every year, travelling backwards and forwards to Southern Africa. And during that time, we've explored a lot, moved around, and had a lot of interesting, sometimes scary experiences in the bush. Zimbabwe is a favourite country of ours. We spent a lot of time there, and we travelled up to a place called Pupils. People have heard of Pupils, I guess, National Park in northern Zimbabwe. It's a very wild place, and unlike the Kruger Park around this place, for some strange reason, they let people walk around. So get out of their car wherever they want to and go from there. Crazy, even tourists like me. So about a year or 2 ago, Nicola and I had stayed in Uplands, and we were camping down on the Zambezi River, had a fantastic time. We had a friend of ours, Robert, who had a rented truck behind us. We were in our Land Rover, and unfortunately it came time to leave. So we left the campsite early to get back to Harare at the time. So just as dawn was breaking, we were driving through the Zambezi River and along this long dirt road. And about 100 metres ahead of me, I saw something run across the road, some animal run across the road. I wasn't 100% sure what it was, but it looked like it could have been a hyena. It moved very quickly. So as we got close to where I thought the animal had crossed the road, I stopped the truck and I opened the door. And Nicola, my wife, says to me, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to get out, I'm going to have a look at the tracks on the ground." She says, "Why are you doing that?" I said, "Because I'm allowed to. I can get out of here, it's all okay, I'm going to see what that animal was." She says, "Stay in the truck." I said, "No, I'm going to have a look." So I get out of the truck. She says, "Get back in the truck then." I said, "No, I'm going to have a look." Yeah, I've been travelling around for quite a while by this stage. I've been 17, 18 years living off and on in the bush. I can look after myself. So I go along, and I'm looking down on the ground, and there's a very fresh track on the ground. I said, "Hey, look at this." She says, "Get in the truck, now." I said, "No, just look at the track." I said, "So I know I was right." She says, "Okay, get in the truck, now." And I said, "No, hang on. Because I was on a roll here. I'm using my tracking abilities, so thank you, I missed the safari guide. So I looked down there, I said, "There's some other tracks down there." She says, "Get in the truck now." I said, "Hang on, I'm just having a look at these other tracks." And as I bent down, with my friend Robert behind in the other car back there, and Nicola's in the front of the truck just about screaming now, I said, "Hey, you know what this is? It's a," and she goes, "lion." And I said, "Yes, a lion." She says, "Behind you." And as I turned around, there was this fully grown lioness standing in the middle of the road, just past the vehicle behind me. So what do I do now? I'm standing there like this, completely exposed. I see this lion over my back. And what do they tell you? You know, they say, "Don't run. Whatever you do, don't run." I'm saying, "It's a lion." I'm not going to stand it. I don't think I ran. I jumped. I tell you, I leapt about 8 or 10 metres in through the front of the Land Rover with my feet sticking out the window. I've never been so terrified in my entire life. The moral of that little story is sometimes when someone tells you to do something, you've got to trust them. You've got to trust that they're doing it for your own best interests. As you go through life, I'm old so I can give you this sort of advice, people will tell you what to do and what not to do. Generally, if someone tells you to do something that you don't want to do, it could be because it's in your own best interest, but you just don't know it at the time. And when my wife said stay in the truck, I should have trusted her. Other times though, in my experience, and directly related to what I'm here to talk about today, is when it comes to writing, people will tell you not to do stuff. And when it comes to life and your career choices, people will tell you don't do that. That's a stupid thing to do. You should rather study this or rather study that. The only thing, well, there was two things. There's only two things that I ever wanted to do when I was a kid when I grew up. Was number one, join the Australian Army and fly helicopters. And number two was to write a book. Now, I worked out pretty early on in my school life that I was no genius at maths or science. I couldn't do maths or science, but I had to have those subjects in order to train as a pilot in the Army. So consequently, I didn't train to be a pilot in the Army because I couldn't do it. That wasn't what I was good at school or what motivated me. That was a job, but I think if I had a passion, my passion was to always write a book. One thing I always wanted to do since I was a little kid. My mum got me reading early, and I thought, this is what I want to do in life. As I got older, I started working, even as a journalist, even working and writing as a profession. It was, as I said, probably the only thing I could do at school was write stuff. Couldn't do science. But people started telling me, don't do that. Don't get your heart set on writing a book because you won't get published. It's too hard. Now, it's true. There's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people at any given time working away on a novel, maybe a non-fiction book, sending them to publishers and getting rejected. Okay? It's a very small market, and the book market around the world is not getting bigger, so it's getting even tougher to get published. But I thought maybe, just maybe, if I stuck at it, that one day I might get published. But beyond that, it was something that I wanted to do. I enjoyed the process of writing. It's just who I was and what I wanted to do. So I thought I'll give it a go, even though people said to me, you're mad, don't do it. It was very hard initially when I was working to spend time writing a book. Is there anyone like to have a guess how many words there are in a novel about that size? 120,000 words. A lot of words. That's a lot of words. So to do that while working in a full-time job is hard. So I said to my boss one day in Australia, I'm going to quit my job to go and write a book. He said, you're mad. He said, you won't get published, no one gets published, don't do it. Well, I thought, you know what? I've got to trust myself. I figured that if I'm going to have one go at this, then I'm going to give it everything that I've got. Now, to sort of come back to probably something that might be more relevant to you guys and girls when you've got to work, there are ways to write. There are ways of being taught to write. Now, I read a couple of books about how to write books, how to write novels, and they all said pretty much the same thing. That you should have a plot, you should have a structure, like a blueprint. A beginning, a middle, and an end of your story. You should know what's going to happen. You should know who the characters are in the book. You should know what they look like, how they act, their past history, their lives, what motivates them. And then, put it all together and you fill in the blanks and you've got a book. Right, no problem. So I sat down, I quit my job. My wife gave me 6 months to write a book before I had to go looking for another job. And I sat down to write a book. The problem was, I failed. I couldn't think of a story. I couldn't think of a beginning, a middle, or an end. I couldn't think of characters. How could I make up entire people out of thin air? It was really, really, really hard. But I tried my best, but it just didn't feel right. And I started to wonder whether this thing that I'd always wanted to do since I was a little kid was indeed the right thing for me to do. Because I didn't seem to be any good at it. And when I finally did manage to cobble together a story, I wrote a book. I set it in Australia, in the outback. I'm from Sydney, I've never been to the outback. I didn't even know anything about the middle of Australia, but I did a bit of research. I wrote this book, got to the end of it, filled in all the blanks about the characters and the plot of the story, and when I sat down and read it afterwards, it was quite possibly the worst book I had ever read in my entire life. It was so predictable. You could see the end coming a million miles away. The characters were flat, they were one-dimensional, they were boring. I gave it to my mum to read, just to see maybe I was being too harsh on myself. You know what my mum said when she finished reading it? She said, very nice, dear. Now, if your mum says, very nicely, that means it's bad. That was the best she could come up with. So I thought, what am I going to do? This is the only thing I wanted to do in life, and I'm not very good at it. I sent that book to one publisher, and predictably it was rejected. I was even I didn't even want to send it to a publisher. I thought it was so bad. But I thought I'll go through the motions and try it. And then I came to this point in my life where I thought, maybe I've got it wrong. I was doubting myself. I didn't trust myself to be able to do this thing that I always wanted to do. I had two options. I could maybe go back and try and fix that book up. Or I could try to write another one. And hopefully maybe I've learned a thing or two from the first one. But the process of writing this idea that you had to have a beginning and a middle and an end, you had to have a blueprint and a plot, was really bringing me unstuck. Now by this stage, Nicola and I had been travelling to Africa on our annual vacations about 4 or 5 times. And we were becoming more and more hooked on this amazing, beautiful, inspiring, sometimes tragic and very confronting continent. But we were becoming more and more involved and more interested. So we bought an old Land Rover and we decided that we would take 4 or 5 months travelling around Southern Africa. The last of the savings that we had. This was the last chance of leaving it everything done. Nicola took leave from her job. And I found myself in the Kruger National Park, which was the first place I'd ever visited in South Africa, sitting under a tree, outside a tent, with a laptop. And I thought, you know, I've got no more excuses. I have to trust myself that this is the one thing I want to do in life and that hopefully I'm going to be able to do it. I can't think of a story. I can't think of a beginning, a middle, or an end. So I thought, what am I going to do? Why don't I just make it up as I go along? Now, as we're sitting in the camp, this big overland truck pulled in. You know the big overland tour truck? All of the hippies and, you know, backpackers having a great time and partying and making too much noise in the camps as they do, and they did. I thought, now there's an interesting bunch of people from around the world, all here on a first-time experience, getting up to all sorts of mischief and nonsense. I could set a book set on one of those trucks. So I watched them and I sat down, and as they were starting to set their tents up, some of them were bickering. You could tell that there was a bit of romance going on between some of them. And the girls were sort of hanging around the safari guide, and some of the guys were getting jealous of this kind of thing. So I thought I could start writing a book based on that. And I did. And over the course of that trip, sort of 4 or 5 months, I would wake up every day and I would write a little bit more of my book. I made up this story which involved poachers and wildlife and these crazy backpackers getting up to all sorts of mischief and things on the books. And that story followed where we were travelling in that 5 months. So I went through Kruger, up into Zimbabwe, across to Botswana, along through Zambia, and when the travel's finished, by the time we finished that 4 or 5 months, I had myself a manuscript, basically a first draft of the book. Every day I wrote that book, I didn't know what was going to happen next. I made it up as I went along. I didn't know what the middle was going to be, and I didn't know what the end was going to be. And I didn't know who the characters were because they had to reveal themselves to me as I wrote. And you know what? I really, really enjoyed it. It was like reading a book really slowly. I didn't want to know what was going to happen next. I wanted to be surprised. I wanted to keep myself entertained. And that was a challenge because I would have to use my brain. Instead of working to a pre-scripted plot, I would have to think up something new, interesting and sensational to happen to these fictitious people each day. I had to keep myself guessing. I had to keep my wife guessing because I knew that she was going to be the first person to read this book and that I would have to try and fool her. I didn't want her to know what the end of the story was going to be. At the end of that process, I had 120,000 words or so, but because I made it up as I went along, it was a bit jumbled up. There were things that happened out of order, characters that started the book as blonde hair with blue eyes, ended up with black hair and brown eyes and things, and the route of the tour was sort of incorrect in places. So my wife read it and helped me straighten the book out. So if you look at 2 ways of writing, the process of writing, the textbook way, I think it would probably be the best way and the easiest way if I could do it, is to have a movement, is to have a plot, and think about your story beforehand. But you know what? Sometimes you just have to trust yourself and just start writing. And believe in yourself that somewhere within you, you'll find the inspiration to keep going with the story. So I think you can write that without following the rules, by trusting yourself. But then what happens at the end, if you're going to work that way, you've still got the same amount of words. What you have to do is basically go back to the start of that book or that work of that creative writing assignment, or that other piece of writing that you're working on, and iron it out. Find a common theme, find a bit of a plot, and use that as your guideline to be your first rewrite, which is what I do when I write my books. So it's not a matter of saving time, it's not a matter of taking an easy option. It's two approaches to the same basic task, which is writing. Either plan it, get it done that way, trust yourself, make it up as you go along, and then spend some time fixing it up. I doubt myself quite often. I've written 11 novels published and 6 biographies. My 12th book is about to come out later this year. Sometimes I'm in the middle of writing a book and I think I can't do this. Sometimes I think I know I don't know what's going to happen, and that's scary. But at those times I have to take a deep breath, go back to thinking about how lucky I've been in my life, how with the help and the trust of my wife I've been able to make my dream come true, because that first book that I wrote did get published, and I've been writing a book a year ever since then. And so I'm going to trust myself to carry on with this, but then at the end of that process, there are a lot of hard work to do. That's my process of writing. Thank you for listening. Now, who wants to win a book? Okay. Who wants to? Let's give me some questions. Yeah. Who's my favourite author? The person that inspired me. I've got a few favourite authors. I didn't really start reading books set in Africa until I came here in 1995, so I hadn't read any Wilbur Smith or anyone like that when I was a kid. There was a guy called John Gordon Davis, who's from Zimbabwe originally, who wrote a very, very good book set during the Bush War up there called Hold My Hand and Die, which is very good. There's an American novelist called Nelson DeVille. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of him. He's a very good writer. I like his stuff. Later in life, I read a bit of Wilbur Smith's books about Africa. I quite enjoyed some of his older books. But South Africa produces some fantastic authors, some of whom are making it big on the world stage, and some of whom haven't yet, but really deserve to be there. For some reason, I cannot fathom, given that, or maybe the reason that is, with crime being a problem in this country, South Africa produces some of the world's best crime writers, which I find a little bit unusual. But Dion Mayer is a very good writer. Marky Orford is a brilliant crime writer from Cape Town. There's a young guy, Sifiso Mzogi, wrote a fantastic book a couple of years ago, and I hope he writes something. So yeah, there's a few. And I think if you are interested in reading or writing at all, it's good to read as much as you can. It's good to read different stuff that's a little bit out of your context. Yeah. Sorry? Yeah, 6 months. Yeah, I think there's an old adage when it comes to writing novels, they say write about what you know. So you do tend to draw on your life experiences, and as I've had more life experiences, I have put them in the book. So, yeah, I'm in the Army Reserve back home. I was called up to go to Afghanistan, and I had 6 months there, and I didn't do anything really out there. I spent most of my time behind a desk, but I did meet a lot of fascinating characters. And had some interesting experiences there. So yes, that has worked itself into my book. So I got my deal for my first book, my publishing deal. I was actually in Afghanistan with the army at the time. And so I was thrilled enough to get that first book published, but they said, now we want another one. So my second book, which is called Zambezi, starts off in Afghanistan, because I happened to be there at the time. And I found when I'm writing, what helps me is to put the locations of where I am into the book. When I'm writing books set in South Africa or Zimbabwe or Swaziland or Mozambique, because I'm not from any of those countries, I need to be there and experience them when I'm writing. So I kind of do my research on location, whether that's Afghanistan or whether that's in Mozambique. And I look around me and I draw inspiration from the places around me. I am a bit jealous of you young men and women growing up in this part of the world. I don't know whether you think I'm crazy or not, but I had to come here as a foreigner to discover for myself what an amazing country and what an amazing continent and what an amazing part of this continent Southern Africa is. And I've learned a lot along the way in writing. Did I put Afghanistan in there? Yes. Do I put some of Southern Africa's problems in my books? Yes, I have to. Because I'm writing works of fiction. The books are thrillers, okay? So they're action-adventure stories with a bit of romance. But they're all set in the current time. So I can't write a novel set in South Africa and ignore politics, for example. I can't ignore the history of the country. I can't ignore things like load shedding. I can't ignore things like crime. I have to put these things in my book to make them more realistic because they affect people's day-to-day life. And so yeah, my experiences in Afghanistan came through just as my experiences living in South Africa and travelling in the neighbouring countries. Yeah.
Okay, the question is, how do you write your biographies?
Oh, the biographies, yeah, okay, very good question. So I do write biographies, non-fiction books. So it's called ghostwriting, so I write other people's stories. The first one I did was a guy called Kevin Richardson, who's a lion whisperer guy. I don't know if anybody's seen him around. I wrote his story, a South African guy. Biographies are very different for me from the way that I write novels. So when I said I write novels by making it up as I go along and not having a plot or a plan, it's completely different when I write a biography. I do have a plot. I have to sit down with the person whose life story I'm writing and say, you tell me the top 15 things that happened in your life and they're going to become the chapters to this book. So I do plan that out and I plot it out. So it's kind of like I was saying, it's a really good question, thanks for mentioning it, because there isn't a right way or a wrong way to write. You can either make it up and go along, make it up as you go along and then fix it up later, or you can fix it up first and then fill in the blanks. Sometimes the two different approaches work for different assignments, or in my line of work, different books. I can't make up someone's life story as I go. It has to be scripted, it has to be pre-planned. But I can make up a novel. So yeah, so that's a nice reminder, thank you, and a good example of how you can use two different approaches to the same task. Yeah? Yeah, so when I'm writing the novels, do I move around to pick up inspiration or do I stay in the same area? I think what I do is I use the books as an excuse to travel around, okay, to go on holiday. So I wanted to go to Namibia last year, so I've set a book in Namibia. So it's an excuse to go travelling and get inspiration from different places. Quite a few of my books are set in this area, around the Lowveld area, around White River, Nelspruit, Kruger, because that's where I spend a lot of time. So I have to sometimes move on and get out of here and get inspiration from new places. So I use it as an excuse to travel around. I use it as an excuse to go and learn about different cultures, about different places, different countries. And that's one of the fun things about being a writer, is that it's a good excuse to travel. And it's a good excuse to meet people as well, and to learn stuff. Because if you're in a position where you have to do creative writing, if you want to do a bit of research, I think the temptation is to look on the internet, think that you'll find the answers to everything there. For me, the answer is to go out and see for myself, to talk to people in different places, to talk to people in different cultures, and use that as my research. Yeah. Did I study journalism? No, you mean at school or university? Or? Yeah, no, I went to a private school in the western suburb of Sydney, in a pretty bad part of Sydney. And it was kind of the best school in the bad area, I think. And I was the guts of the school, like, I don't know what you call it here, like I was the top student, but it was a really poorly performing year. So I was the top of the nicest school in the worst part of Sydney, and I wasn't that smart. So if I'd been at any other school, I wouldn't have done nearly as well. But I went to university. Thinking that, I don't know what didn't know what to do. But I thought, I could be a lawyer, I didn't want to do that. I want to write books. There weren't any courses in creative writing at the time. My father said to me, whatever you do, he says, don't be a policeman or a journalist. He says he'd been down the pub having a drink and there'd been a poll in the newspaper that said the two lowest jobs in Australia, the two jobs with the lowest esteem amongst the general public. was journalist or policeman. So I went to university, and unlike at school, I didn't do very well. I don't think at my school I've been taught to think. I think in my school, for me to get ahead, all I had to do was repeat what the English teacher said to me, basically. Take lots of notes and write things down. At university, I was expected to think. And there was nothing there. They didn't actually have journalism courses there. But I took my father's advice about never becoming a journalist or a policeman, and I dropped out of university and became a journalist. Because I thought I can't do anything else, I had to go with that. Yeah, so journalism courses didn't exist then. This is 25 years ago. They do, there's lots of journalism courses today. The trouble with the media, certainly in Australia, and I suspect it's the same in South Africa, is that you get a lot of people studying journalism and not many jobs, so it's a pretty hard area to break into. But if you have aspirations to be a writer, even a writer of fiction or non-fiction, having worked as a journalist is a pretty good background, because it does expose you to a lot of different parts of life very quickly. It gets you used to writing down other people's stories, to reporting how they speak. Yeah. So I didn't study journalism, I just kind of fell into that. Yeah. Was it difficult to get my first book published? I fluked. Okay, I sent this manuscript in, this story that I made up on the run, driving around Africa, to a publisher, and I got lucky. Because what I didn't realise was that publisher happened to be looking for what's called a mass market fiction thriller, which is what that is, which is just like the sort of book you buy at the airport or whatever, just to sort of entertain yourself, nothing too deep. But they wanted one set in Africa, because there was another Australian writing books set in Africa, a lady by the name of Beverly Harper, who actually did quite well in South Africa as well too. And unfortunately, she was ill. She was about to pass away, and so they happened to be looking for another author to write books set in Africa. So it's a bit of a sad story, but it was just a fluke. To get published is not easy. But as I said before, I had to trust myself that this is the one thing in life I wanted to do. If I stuck with it, hopefully I'd get lucky. We're probably getting close to time, but there's just one other thing that I wanted to say about writing. I don't know if anyone here is really interested in writing. There's generally a few people, and sometimes they don't want to put their hands up. But if you are interested in writing, just do it. Write for fun. I fully maintain that if I hadn't been published, I would still be working on the novel today. 12 years later, I would still be writing. Because to me, it's a little bit like sport. You know? I like to run, I like to swim, I like to play a bit of tennis, but I'm not particularly good at any of those things. There's no way I was ever going to represent Australia in the Olympics as a swimmer or a runner. And there's no way I was going to come even close to being a professional tennis player. But I did those things because I enjoyed them. I think writing is the same thing. I wouldn't suggest writing because it's going to be a ticket to fame and fortune. You're going to be the next J.K. Rowling and earn more money than the Queen. I don't think that's going to happen for most of us. But if you enjoy it, like playing sport or exercise, just do it because it's fun. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. Yes.
Stella wants see the 2014 Mercury Street. Life is very extended.
Now, my wife is just telling me who's won the books. Yeah, who asked the question about how do I write my biographies? Okay, there's one book up there for you. Inspiration. Oh yeah, okay, alright, oh yeah. Give a present, you get a present. There you go. Well done. Author inspiration. Yes, you win a prize.